Economy during reforms and assessment. The reform process of 1991, that is, has completed 1.5 decades when this book was published, since its introduction. So let us now look at the performance of the Indian economy during the period. In economics, growth of an economy is measured by the GDP, gross domestic product. Now, they've asked us to study the table. So here, let's study the table. If you can see that, just take a look at this table. Sectors are given as agriculture, industry and services. And then you have 1980, 1991. So these are the figures. That is growth of the GDP and major sectors in percentage terms. Okay, so this is how you will look at these figures. And as I read, you're going to compare them. So in the book you have table number 3.1 and the sources 10th 5-year plan, faster, sustainable and more inclusive growth, and approach to the 12th 5-year plan, Planning Commission, Government of India, 2011. Just make a note of the table, and as I read, I explain from here. As I read, you compare notes. So look at table 3.1. The growth of GDP increased from 5.6% during 1980-91 to 8.2%. Increased from 5.6% during 1980-91 to 8.2% during 2007-2012. During the reform period, the growth of agriculture has declined, while the industrial sectors reported fluctuation. The growth of service sector has gone up. This indicates that the growth is mainly driven by the growth in the service sector. The 12th plan, that is 2012 to 2017, envisages the GDP growth rate at 9 or 9.5%. In order to achieve such a high growth rate, the agriculture, industrial and services sectors have to grow at the rates of 4 to 4.2, 9.6 to 10.9 and 10 percentage points respectively. However, some scholars raised apprehensions over the projection of such high rates of growth as unsustainable. The opening up of the economy has led to rapid increase in foreign direct investment and foreign exchange reserves. The foreign investment, which includes foreign direct investment, that is FDI, and foreign institutional investment, that is FII, has increased from $100 million in 1991 to $400 billion in 2010-11. There has been an increase in the foreign exchange reserves from about $6 billion in 1991 to about $400 billion in 2011-12. India is one of the largest foreign exchange reserve holders in the world. India is seen as a successful exporter of auto parts, engineering goods, IT, software and textile. In the reform period, rising prices have also been kept under control. On the other hand, the reform process has been widely criticized for not being able to address some of the basic problems facing our economy, especially in the areas of employment, agriculture, industry, infrastructure development, and fiscal management. So now we talk about growth and employment. Though the GDP growth rate has increased in the reform period, scholars point out that the reform-led growth has not generated sufficient employment opportunities in the country. You will study the link between different aspects of employment and growth in the next unit. Talking about reforms in agriculture, reforms have not been able to benefit agriculture where the growth rate has been decelerating. Public investment in agriculture sector, especially in infrastructure which includes irrigation, power, roads, market linkages and research and extension which played a crucial role in the Green Revolution, has been reduced in the reform period. Further, the removal of fertilizer subsidy has led to increase in the cost of production, which has severely affected the small and marginal farmers. This sector has been experiencing a number of policy changes, such as reduction in import duties on agricultural products, removal of minimum support price, and lifting of quantitative restrictions on agricultural products. These have adversely affected Indian farmers as they now have to face increased international competition. Moreover, because of export oriented policy strategies in agriculture, there has been a shift from production for the domestic market towards production for the export market, focusing on cash crops in lieu of production of food grains. This puts pressure on prices of food grains. Now, talking about reforms in industry. Industrial growth has also recorded a slowdown. This is because of decreasing demand of industrial products due to various reasons such as cheaper imports, inadequate investment in infrastructure, etc. In a globalized world, developing countries are compelled to open up their economies to greater flow of goods and capital from developed countries and rendering their industries vulnerable to imported goods. Cheaper imports have thus replaced the demand for domestic goods. Domestic manufacturers are facing competition from imports. The infrastructure facilities, including power supply, have remained inadequate due to lack of investment. And in the box, they've talked about the Siricilla tragedy. That was the power sector reforms in many Indian states led to do away with the supply of electricity at subsidized rates and steep rise in power tariffs. This has affected workers engaged in small industries. Powerloom textile industry in Andhra Pradesh is an example, since the wages of the powerloom workers are linked to the production of cloth. Power cut means cut in wages of weavers who were already suffering from hike in tariffs. This led to a crisis in the livelihood of the weavers, and 50 powerloom workers committed suicide in a small town called Siricilla in Andhra Pradesh. So that's given in the box that you can read in your textbooks. So again, let me just read once again that the infrastructure facilities, including power supply, have remained inadequate due to lack of investment. Globalization is thus often seen as creating conditions for the free movement of goods and services from foreign countries that adversely affect the local industries and employment opportunities in developing countries. Moreover, a developing country like India still does not have the access to developed countries' market because of high non-tariff barriers. For example, although all quota restrictions on exports of textile and clothing have been removed in India, US has not removed their quota restrictions on import of textiles from India and China. So now we come to disinvestment. Every year, the government fixes a target for disinvestment of PSUs. For instance, in 1991-92, it was targeted to mobilize rupees 2,500 crore through disinvestment. The government was able to mobilize 3,040 crores, more than the target. In 2010-11, the target was rupees 40,000 crores, whereas the achievement was rupees 22,850 crores. Critics point out that the assets of PSUs have been undervalued and sold to the private sector. This means that there has been a substantial loss to the government. Moreover, The proceeds from the disinvestment were used to offset the shortage of government revenues rather than using it for the development of PSUs and building social infrastructure in the country. Do you think selling a part of the properties of government companies is the best way to improve their efficiency? Just think about it. Reforms and fiscal policies. Economic reforms have placed limits on the growth of public expenditure, especially in social sectors. The tax reductions in the reform period aimed at yielding larger revenue and to curb tax evasion have not resulted in increase in tax revenue for the government. Also, the reform policies involving tariff reduction have curtailed the scope for raising revenue through customs duties. In order to attract foreign investment, tax incentives were provided to foreign investors, which further reduced the scope for raising tax revenues. This has a negative impact on developmental and welfare expenditures. So that was an overview or assessment that we saw, that you've just gone through. So box 3.3, Sirisila's tragedy, talks about the steep rise in power tariff, which I just read, and also power cuts, which meant fall in wages of the weavers who this place in Andhra Pradesh, 50 workers, power loom workers, committed suicide. So that finishes our appraisal of the reform process, Unit 2, Economic Reforms, LPG, that is Liberalization, Privatization and Globalization, since 1991.